He slammed that little red and white flash drive on my keyboard like it was a gavel from God. Didn't knock, didn't sit. Just stood there in his wrinkleless navy suit with his arms crossed like he'd just won something. "Hand over the client contracts and clean out your desk," he said, like that sentence was supposed to scare me. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just looked at the drive like it was a joke, then looked right back at him. "I don't store them here," I said, slowly pushing the USB back toward him with one finger. "They live under my own entity. You'll need more than a USB stick to access them." He smirked like he thought I was bluffing, then turned on his heels and left. No goodbyes, no questions. Just that smug little strut I've seen 100 times from execs who think confidence outranks competence. Before we go any further, if you're listening and you haven't subscribed or liked this story yet, do it now. Seriously, 97% of folks never hit that button, and it makes a huge difference for us keeping these real stories coming. Now, back to the mess. I waited a solid 2 minutes after the door clicked shut before moving. No rush, no panic. Just pulled up the folder on my screen. Escrow chain, active agreements, every signed contract, every renewal, every cross-border clause notarized and stored under my LLC, not theirs. See, 7 years ago, when they expanded into EMEA and needed someone to handle multilingual legalities, tax structures, and time zones they couldn't pronounce, they came to me. I offered a solution. House the contracts under an independent entity to simplify compliance. I even got it blessed by their legal team. Back then, they were grateful, called it brilliant. Now, with a new VP fresh off some Silicon Valley treadmill, they've suddenly forgotten how things were built. I didn't even bother calling legal yet. First thing I did was open a private channel to my counsel, dropped in the access log backups, and screen shared my view of the contract tree. Every client's agreement filed under dual control, bound by my digital custody certificate, with a time-stamped access audit going back 6 years. I also sent a courtesy ping to the head of risk, just 2 lines. Access attempt on external custodian records. Legal backup engaged. She didn't respond, but the read receipt popped up 10 seconds later. Then I pulled up the last internal redline version of the standard contract. Something had changed. The signature field had moved. Clause 7B was edited in a way that loosened custody language. Someone was trying to quietly centralize authority, and I'd bet that smug little twit with the flash drive had a hand in it. But here's the kicker. They forgot one critical fact. My contracts aren't just PDFs sitting in a folder. They're smart custody agreements backed by tokenized access rights and jurisdictional wrappers across 4 countries. You don't just take those. You earn them. You're granted them. Or, if you're dumb enough, you lose them. By the end of the day, I had triggered the internal watcher system. Any attempt to copy, print, or export those documents from the shared drive would log a silent alert to my legal inbox and freeze the payload mid-transfer. I didn't want to be petty. I just wanted to be ready. And I was. Because amateurs with new job titles always think VP means very powerful. But real power isn't on their badge. It's in the signature chain. Most people in that building never even knew what a custodial entity was, let alone why it mattered. They just assumed everything lived on a shared drive in some cloud folder labeled Contracts, Final V3. But I didn't deal in assumptions. I dealt in clauses, dates, notarizations, and digital custody chains that wrapped tighter than any VP's grip on their ego. For 7 years, I'd managed every contract through my LLC. Not to be cute, not to feel important. Because that was what tax law and cross-border compliance demanded. The company's CFO at the time, an actual adult with a memory longer than a TED Talk, had agreed to the structure without blinking. We even had it reviewed by a third-party regulator before onboarding our first EMEA client. It wasn't shady, it was smart. And everyone with a law degree or a spine had signed off annually without a peep. But then, 2 weeks ago, the signature fields in the templates started moving. Not in big, obvious ways, just subtle edits, tucked into the red lines. The authorized signatory tag shifted down past my name. Then the custody clause got watered down. Then language about jurisdiction was swapped. UK replaced with Delaware, which meant they were trying to recenter everything under their home base. I've seen that kind of drift before. It never comes with a memo. It shows up like a rumor with a Word doc. And I knew what it meant. Someone, somewhere, was planning to cut me out of the equation. So I did what I always do, quietly, systematically, and without an ounce of drama. I reissued digital custody notices to every single client, one by one. 42 of them across 8 time zones. Each message contained a secure receipt verifying the original terms, the entity custodian, my LLC, and a polite reminder that any changes to signatory structure would require formal notice and bilateral approval. No threats, no alarms, just good housekeeping. By morning, replies had already started trickling in. Confirmed. Custody acknowledged under prior terms. Noted and logged. No structural changes approved from our side. One of them, our biggest client in Zurich, even added a line, "Appreciate the clarity. We've had a lot of transitions on our end too." They had no idea just how much clarity they were about to need. Meanwhile, I locked the last round of signature tokens. These aren't just passwords. They're jurisdiction-anchored digital keys tied to the original contract metadata, time-stamped, and validated through a third-party custody service. Once I locked them, no one, not legal, not even the CEO, could retroactively assign signing authority without my reauthorization. I also checked access logs on the internal server. Surprise. Our new VP had tried to open 3 archived contract folders the night before. 1 failed login, 2 view-only attempts, and 1 flagged attempt to export a preview PDF. I smiled. That last one triggered a soft freeze on the directory. You see, contracts don't live on drives, not the real ones. They live in ownership. They live in the space between 2 signatures, and they're only alive as long as the terms are honored. These guys? They were poking around like raccoons in a locked fridge. I wasn't angry yet, but I was very, very awake. I built Clause 7 myself. Not from scratch. Nothing's really from scratch in contract law, but from the broken pieces of 10 different deals that nearly imploded because someone forgot who held what when the personnel changed. It was a pain then. A blessing now. The original structure gave the company full service rights, yes, but not ownership. I retained custodial authority through my entity, and Clause 7b was the spine of that authority. Every agreement, every renewal, every cross-border contract carried the same language, line for line. In the event of personnel transition, contract custody remains with signatory entity unless formally transferred. And guess what? No formal transfer had ever occurred. Not when the COO retired, not when we merged departments, not when 3 other VPs came and went like bad weather. No one ever touched the structure, because deep down, everyone knew why it was there. If things ever got messy, this clause would be the firewall. The moment I saw that flash drive on my keyboard earlier that morning, I knew what was coming. So before I left the building that day, I made a little stop. Not dramatic, not even out of the way. Just down the hall to the server room, where my private signing node sat inside a secured terminal, air-gapped from their internal network and authenticated through a biometric key. I logged in, logged the change of custody status, revoked read access from the company's general directory, and quietly activated Clause 9e across all live tokens. Clause 9e doesn't scream. It doesn't even bark. It simply watches. It monitors for unauthorized access attempts, preview downloads, signature simulation, metadata scraping, and the second something crosses the threshold, it freezes the involved records. Not deletes, not locks out, just freezes, as in no edits, no signatures, no auto-renewals, no transactions. It's like a silent fire alarm, and I could already smell the smoke. Back at home, I poured a cup of black coffee, sat down in my office, and watched the logs roll in. Sure enough, not 30 minutes later, someone tried to bulk export 3 EMEA contracts. All 3 attempts pinged the internal compliance API. All 3 were flagged as unauthorized preview by unregistered credential. And right on cue, my secondary alert system forwarded a silent notification to the company's legal inbox. Subject: Custody lock initialized, attempted overreach detected custodian entity Extentity Holdings. LLC timestamp, 1452 UTC action required. Review clause 9E and custodial access protocols. No emotion. No commentary, just the facts. That's the thing about being underestimated. They never expect you to be prepared. They think if you're not in the boardroom shouting, you're not dangerous, but I didn't need to yell. I had custody, I had Clause 7, and now I had the entire Q4 deal flow frozen in time like a wasp in amber. The VP didn't know it yet. He probably thought he was on a winning streak, still licking his chops over the consolidation plan he pitched in the exec meeting. He probably went to lunch bragging about the new centralized contract drive, how clean and streamlined it was going to look in Monday's report. He had no idea he was already standing in quicksand. And I had just stopped the clock. I watched the town hall from my living room, laptop open, one hand resting on the mug that hadn't needed refilling in hours. His face filled the screen, clean shave, fresh suit, champagne flute lifted just high enough for the camera. He looked like a man about to take a victory lap he didn't earn. Q4 pipelines locked in, he said, his smile wide and rehearsed. Contracts have been centralized. No more middlemen. We're streamlining for the future. And the room clapped. Oh, they clapped. People love momentum, even when it's built on air. They'll applaud anything if it sounds confident. But momentum doesn't mean much when the wheels aren't touching the ground. I leaned forward as the camera panned slightly, catching faces. HR, legal, finance, all nodding along, none of them realizing the actual contracts he was bragging about weren't his to hold. Then came the only voice that mattered. "Just checking," said Dana, the head of sales. She raised a hand and gave that squint she always got when something didn't sit right. "Do we have countersigned versions on file?" There was a pause, barely a second, but you could feel it. That twitch of hesitation in the VP's jaw before he forced a grin back into place. "Already handled," he said, waving her off like she was a child. "All the files are in our new drive. Everything's consolidated and accounted for." Except they weren't. Because what was in that shiny new drive he was parading around weren't active contracts. They were PDF previews, some of them even still watermarked as draft in the upper corner. Not one contained the blockchain-verified signature stamp my custody service provided. Not one had the validation hash required for counterparty enforcement. And not one was legally binding without my token, but he didn't know that. He hadn't looked past the file names. He'd seen client agreement final and assumed it meant done. Dana didn't say anything else, just opened the drive in another tab on her second screen and clicked into the metadata view. I know because 10 minutes after the call ended, she messaged me directly. "Why does every contract say view only Custodian Extentity Holdings Ltd?" I didn't answer right away. Just let her sit with that question a while. In the meeting chat, the emojis kept flying, clapping hands, champagne bottles, rocket ships, people celebrating numbers that weren't real, deals that weren't active, signatures that didn't exist. And all the while, Legal was sitting quietly in the corner box on the screen, lips pressed thin, eyes scanning, because they'd seen the alert. They'd gotten the custody freeze notice, and they knew exactly what that metadata meant. The VP didn't. He was still sipping champagne, rambling on about streamlining, reducing bottlenecks, removing unnecessary custodial steps. His exact words. Unnecessary. That's what he called the one clause keeping his Q4 revenue projections from collapsing into a compliance dumpster fire. I muted the audio and just watched. This part didn't require me. I'd already moved the pieces. Now, they'd fall on their own. The subject line alone was enough to set the CEO's hair on fire. Contract custody compromised. No spin, no softening. Just 5 words, delivered by Legal with a PDF attached, and a trail of audit logs stretching back to the moment that smug little VP dropped a flash drive on my keyboard like he was confiscating high school contraband. The body of the email was even sharper. Please see attached. The VP terminated the only recognized contract custodian. No transfer authorization. No entity dissolution. Client-side validity now frozen. Immediate action required. They didn't even CC him. Just went straight up the chain and dropped the pin in the map. I wasn't in the room, of course. I wasn't even in the building. I was sitting in my home office, wearing a hoodie, sipping a lukewarm chai, and watching the client portal flicker like a Christmas tree in alert mode. One by one, the contracts began flipping from active to custodial validation pending. The entire EMEA pipeline was in legal purgatory. Client-side dashboards now displayed a gray banner at the top of every agreement. Contract inactive, awaiting custodian validation. That phrase might sound polite to a layperson, but to a procurement officer, it's an air raid siren. It means the deal can't be booked. The service can't be onboarded. The invoice can't be processed. And most importantly, it means their compliance department will not sign off. I didn't have to say a word. The system was doing the talking for me. Somewhere across town, the CEO was sitting in his corner office, rereading Clause 7 for the third time, while legal briefed him on what the VP had done, specifically what he hadn't done. No entity handoff, no formal custody transfer, no review of the LLC agreement, which, by the way, had been filed with the SEC in 2019 as part of our IPO disclosures. It was public record. He hadn't even Googled it, and now they were in full-blown scramble mode. I knew that because legal flagged my LinkedIn profile as recently viewed. Then 5 minutes later, the head of client ops called my old work cell. Twice. No voicemail. I let it ring. It's always fascinating to me how fast people move when the money freezes. All those people who ignored my process documents, who rolled their eyes at my entity charts, who said things like, "Can't we just centralize this?" Suddenly they're all shouting, "Where's the real contract?" and "Who has the signing keys?" They're learning. Slowly. The head of sales pinged me privately. "Just between us, are we locked out?" I typed one sentence and hit send. Yes. That was all I needed to say. It wasn't personal. It was procedural. They pulled the wrong thread and the whole legal fabric came undone. Then, 15 minutes later, I saw the meeting get scheduled. Urgent. 4 p.m., CEO plus legal plus custody review. And just like that, I knew exactly what was coming. They were going to ask me to fix it, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. The call came through on my personal line. No assistant, no calendar invite, just a raw, direct number I hadn't seen flash across my screen in over a year. "Emily," the CEO said, skipping any pleasantries. I didn't approve any of this. I didn't have to ask what he meant. His voice said everything. Tight, clipped, not angry exactly, just cornered. "We can't onboard clients without those agreements," he added, not a question, a confession. "I'm aware," I said calmly, spinning my chair slightly toward my second monitor. He took a breath. I could hear the stress vibrating behind his throat. I waited. "You retained control through your entity?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Everyone did now. It had been in black and white since 2019. "Per original setup," I said, pulling up the scanned and notarized copy from my archive. Clause 7, approved by your office, digital custody anchored through Extentity Holdings LLC, co-signed by you, legal, and the risk committee. I clicked Share Screen. On his end, the document populated, title page, first few clauses, then the highlighted section in the margin I'd pre-marked for him. Clause 7b, spelled out in unmissable legal font. In the event of personnel transition, contract custody remains with signatory entity unless formally transferred by mutual agreement. He didn't say anything right away, just stared. Or maybe read it 3 times in a row like most do when the reality sinks in. "Can you come in?" he finally asked. I let a second pass before responding, just long enough to remind him I wasn't an employee anymore. I wasn't obligated. I was a partner, whether they liked it or not. "I can." They needed me in that building, not for my presence, but for my authority, for my keys, for my ability to unfreeze what their new hire had wrecked in less than a week. In the silence before he hung up, I added, "For clarity, this isn't a reinstatement talk. This is a custodial compliance correction, and if we're doing it, we do it by the book." He muttered something that sounded like agreement, maybe resignation. Then the line went dead. I stood up, closed the laptop, and grabbed the file folder I hadn't touched in 2 years. Inside, a printed, tabbed version of every clause they'd forgotten, with notes, with annotations, with receipts. It wasn't pride that made me go. It was responsibility. Not to them, to the clients, to the work. I wasn't about to let some champagne-sipping spreadsheet cowboy blow up 7 years of cross-border infrastructure because he thought custody was just a permission setting. By the time I walked into the lobby, the receptionist looked up with wide eyes like she was seeing a ghost. I smiled. "Let them know the custodian is here." The boardroom was quiet when I walked in. Not tense, not angry. Just the kind of quiet that happens when people realize they've built something on sand and the tide's already coming in. On the table, in front of the CEO's chair, sat a crisp, white folder with my name printed in bold. It was flanked by a bottle of still water, a Mont Blanc pen, and a stack of paper with a plastic tab labeled Reinstatement Offer. I didn't sit, didn't touch the folder. Instead, I looked around the room, caught each pair of eyes that dared meet mine, and then said what needed to be said. My entity, I began, remains the sole custodian of all active contracts, as agreed upon in the 2019 framework, and never formally transferred. No one interrupted. Not legal, not the CFO, not the head of sales, and certainly not the VP, who was conspicuously absent. All new contracts moving forward will require dual signature validation, one from the company and one from my entity. No exceptions, no backdoors. Any attempt to bypass the process will automatically trigger a custody freeze. I paused. Let that land. The VP, I continued, has no legal signing authority until properly trained and audited by compliance. His access remains suspended until completion. A rustle at the far end of the table. Someone shifted uncomfortably. I kept going. Any modification of contract template, signing protocols, or structural clauses will trigger a full independent audit by our external counsel, and if necessary, a client disclosure review. If transparency is not your favorite word, now's a good time to make peace with it. I finally sat. The reinstatement packet remained untouched. I wasn't there for a job offer. I wasn't even there for vindication. I was there to prevent further damage, to protect the clients who trusted my structure, the ones who replied with custody confirmed because they knew who they were really doing business with, and to make sure that no one in that building ever confused job title with legal authority again. The CEO cleared his throat, glanced at the general counsel, then back at me. The GC nodded once, silent, and slid a different folder toward me, not a reinstatement. This one was labeled Custodial Access, Formal Authorization Packet. Now we were speaking the same language. I opened it, flipped past the cover letter, and found everything I needed. Recognition of current custodial structure, acknowledgement of digital signature exclusivity, updated security protocols, and one beautifully bold clause stating, all legal service contracts will be executed via dual entity framework. At the bottom, a single line was waiting for my initials. I didn't rush. After a moment, I looked back up and said, "Now bring him in." It was time the VP learned what custodianship really meant. He walked in trying to look composed, shoulders squared, jacket buttoned, jaw set like he'd been practicing in the mirror for 20 minutes. But confidence doesn't hide sweat, and it definitely doesn't hide the thin flush creeping up his neck when he saw me at the table with the general counsel seated calmly at my side. I didn't say a word, just watched as he took the only open chair directly across from me. The CEO didn't greet him. No one did. The air was dense with consequence. I slid the contract across the table, face up, the edges perfectly aligned with the grain in the wood. His name was on the footer, one of the template versions he'd been playing with before everything froze. On page 3, I had already highlighted the clause, the part he missed, the part that undid everything. In the event of custody challenge, I said aloud, tapping the text with one finger, the original signatory shall be notified and hold binding authority for 30 business days. He read it once, his brow furrowed. He read it again, slower this time, tracing each word with his eyes like they might morph into something more favorable if he stared long enough. Still didn't get it, so I leaned in, quietly, evenly, not to intimidate, but to ensure clarity. You fired the signatory with binding authority. He blinked. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. There's no pleasure in watching someone realize the ground beneath them was paperwork they never bothered to read. But I wasn't going to rescue him either. He had yanked the wheel on a moving vehicle without checking the manual, and now the engine was smoking in front of the board. Silence stretched long across the table. The CEO finally broke it with a sigh, not the frustrated kind, but the disappointed kind that sounds like a door closing. "This is your mess," he said quietly. "Learn from it." The VP's lips parted slightly, like he wanted to defend himself, but nothing came out. His gaze dropped to the contract again, then to the general counsel who remained silent, expression flat, hands folded. no lifelines. Because at this point, there were none. He wasn't fired, not yet, but he was disarmed. Stripped of access, authority, and illusion. The confidence he walked in with was now pooling in his collar. The only thing left for him to do was nod. He didn't. But he didn't argue either. I turned back to the CEO. I'll initiate the restoration sequence once the final acknowledgement forms are returned. Until then, the freeze remains in place. Understood, he said, then looked toward the VP. You'll support the correction. Fully. The VP gave a tight, silent nod. Not in agreement, in surrender. The thing about clauses is they're not sexy. No one boasts about them in all-hands meetings. But when the storm hits, they're the only things that hold. And this one had just buried him. Back in my office, my real one, not the glass box they'd tried to exile me from. I sat down, took a breath, and logged into the signing server. The sequence was exact. No flair, no drama, just a series of confirmations and time-stamped unlocks. Clause 9E, deactivation. Custody token reauthorization. Signature restoration keys validated through the custody anchor, my entity. Within 5 minutes, the system was humming again like nothing had ever gone wrong. But everything had changed. The client portal flickered back to life, contract by contract, as if blinking off anesthesia. Status bars turned green. PDF previews were replaced by active, countersigned originals. The custodial validation pending banners disappeared, and in their place, live, verified by Extentity Holdings LLC, access restored. But not to everyone. Only approved parties, only those listed under the new dual signature workflow. I left the server running on a secure monitor, closed my laptop, and walked back to the boardroom where they were all still sitting. Quiet, eyes on me like they were waiting to see if the lights would actually turn back on. They're active, I said plainly. A few relieved exhales around the table. Dana, from sales, closed her eyes like someone had lifted 100 pounds off her chest. Legal gave a quiet nod. The CEO sat straighter. Then I looked at the VP. He tried to hold my gaze, but it cracked halfway. You thought a flash drive was enough? I said, my tone level. Not angry, just truthful. He didn't reply. Not a word. Maybe he finally understood that contracts aren't just files. They're living instruments. And I was the one who kept them breathing. I turned to the CEO. You'll receive the new signing workflow by end of day. Custody revalidation, audit trail approval, and entity compliance reviews will be mandatory moving forward. Anyone trying to bypass it will trip the failsafe. He nodded. That's more than fair. No one asked me to stay longer. They didn't need to. My authority was already baked into every document they relied on. On my way out, I passed the VP again. He looked smaller now, deflated, no longer floating on assumption or arrogance. Just a man who'd learned the hard way what it costs to ignore a clause you don't understand. I walked to the elevator, took it down in silence, and stepped out into the gray light of the street. There was no applause, no headlines, no viral moment. But up on the client portal, 42 contracts now bore one line across the footer. Custodian of record, Extentity Holdings LLC, let them call it bureaucracy. Let them roll their eyes at structure and process and unnecessary middlemen. But when the lights flicker and the system groans, they'll know who to call. Not because they like it, because I built it. And now, finally, they understand why it stays alive on my terms.